The year is 1942, and the United States Marine Corps is bleeding out in the jungles of Guadalcanal. American infantrymen are fighting an enemy they can barely see, let alone kill. Japanese snipers have turned the dense Pacific rainforest into a nightmare of invisible death. They tie themselves into treetops for days, camouflaged so perfectly that soldiers walk beneath them without a glance. They shoot medics first. They wait for hours to take single shots. They use the jungle itself as a weapon. Every bird call, every rustling leaf, every shadow could be concealing a trained marksman with a 6.5mm Arisaka rifle and the patience of a monk. The U.S. military has spent decades preparing for European-style warfare. Open fields, clear sight lines, mechanized advances. But the South Pacific isn't Europe. The jungle canopy is so thick that aerial reconnaissance is worthless. Radio communication cuts out every 100 yards. Maps are guesses. And the enemy has been training in jungle warfare since the 1930s, while Americans were still running drills on parade grounds. The numbers tell the story. In the first month of the Guadalcanal campaign, snipers account for nearly 40% of Marine casualties in jungle engagements. Men are shot while eating rations, while filling canteens, while sleeping in foxholes they thought were secure. The psychological toll is crushing. Troops stop talking above a whisper. They stop moving during daylight. Entire patrols freeze for hours because someone heard a branch crack. Standard infantry tactics are useless. You can't suppress an enemy you can't locate. You can't flank a position when the entire jungle is the position. You can't call artillery on your own coordinates. The Marine Corps tries everything. Counter-sniper teams, scouts with binoculars, even bringing in Native American trackers from Arizona and New Mexico. Some of it helps. None of it solves the problem. And then there's Private First Class Jack Merritt. 22 years old, skinny as a fence post, from a tobacco farm outside Hazard, Kentucky. Nobody in his unit thinks much of him. He's not the best shot. He's not the strongest. He didn't grow up hunting or fishing like half the other country boys in Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. What he did grow up doing was wandering the dense Appalachian forests alone, imitating every bird and animal he heard. His grandfather taught him. Old Daniel Merritt was a timber cruiser who spent 50 years walking survey lines through Kentucky wilderness, and he believed you survived the woods by becoming part of them. He taught young Jack to whistle like a wood thrush, hoot like a barred owl, chirp like a cardinal. By age 10, Jack could mimic 30 different bird calls well enough to fool the birds themselves. By 15, he could throw his voice, make a sound seem like it was coming from 20 feet to his left or right. His brothers thought it was stupid. His father called it foolishness that don't put food on the table. When Jack enlisted in early 1941, his drill instructor at Parris Island told him to save the snow white shit for the USO. Nobody thought a farm boy's bird calls would matter in combat. Nobody thought anything from the Kentucky backwoods would translate to the South Pacific. And for the first 3 months of Jack's deployment, they were right. He did his job, carried his M1 Garand, dug his foxholes, followed orders. The whistling stayed buried for the rest of his childhood. But on September 14, 1942, everything changed. Charlie Company is pushing inland from the Lunga perimeter, tasked with clearing a suspected Japanese supply route 3 kilometers into the jungle. It's supposed to be a routine patrol. Emphasis on supposed to be. At 08:47 hours, the point man drops without a sound, a single bullet through his throat. The squad scatters into the undergrowth, but there's no cover, not really. Just vines and ferns and trees that could be hiding a dozen snipers. The second shot comes 90 seconds later. Corporal Davies, hit in the shoulder. He screams, and the sound echoes wrong in the dense canopy, making it impossible to tell where the shot came from. The squad leader, Sergeant Kowalski, orders everyone to freeze and scan the trees. But you can't scan what you can't see. The jungle is a three-dimensional maze of green and shadow. Jack Merritt is crouched behind a rotting log, heart hammering, when he hears it. A soft, two-note whistle. High-low, almost musical. It comes from somewhere ahead and to the right, or maybe above. He's heard that exact sound a dozen times in the last week, always written it off as some tropical bird. But now, in the deadly silence after Davy's scream, his brain makes a connection. That's not a bird. That's a signal. The Japanese are using whistles to communicate, coordinating their positions, marking targets, signaling all clear. And the Americans have been walking past those signals for months, thinking they were just jungle noise. Jack doesn't think. He just reacts. He purses his lips and repeats the whistle. High-low, exactly the same pitch, exactly the same rhythm. Then he waits. 15 seconds of silence. Then from a completely different direction, left and behind, the whistle comes again. But this time there's a question in it, a slight variation. The sniper is confused. Jack whistles again, this time throwing his voice the way his grandfather taught him, making it sound like it's coming from 10 feet to his right. Another pause, then a rustle in the canopy, 40 yards ahead. The sniper is repositioning, trying to figure out where his spotter went. That's when Sergeant Kowalski sees him, just a flicker of movement in a banyan tree. He puts 3 rounds into the position, and a body drops, crashing through branches, hitting the jungle floor with a wet thud. The squad stares. Then they stare at Jack. "What the hell did you just do, Merritt?" Kowalski hisses. Jack doesn't have a good answer. I think I told him I was on his side, Sarge. It should have been a fluke. One lucky break in a war full of chaos and coincidence." But Jack can't stop thinking about it. That night, back at the perimeter, he lies in his foxhole and listens to the jungle. And now that he's paying attention, he hears them everywhere. Whistles, clicks, chirps. Some are real birds, but some aren't. Some have a pattern and purpose. The Japanese aren't just using whistles randomly. They have a system. Different calls for different messages. Jack starts cataloging them in a little notebook he took off a dead Marine. 2 short chirps, all clear. 3 rising notes. Enemy spotted. A long trill followed by silence. Hold position. A sharp, descending whistle. Retreat. He hasn't told anyone yet, partly because he's not sure, partly because he knows how it'll sound. Some hillbilly private claiming he's cracked enemy communications by imitating birds. But on September 19th, he gets his chance to test it. Charlie Company is moving through a river valley when the point squad gets hit again. This time, Jack is near the front. The first shot misses, cracks into a tree trunk 6 inches from his head. Everyone drops, and Jack hears it again, that same high-low whistle, followed by a response from deeper in the jungle. Without waiting for orders, Jack whistles back. 3 rising notes. Enemy spotted. But he changes the direction, makes it sound like it's coming from the opposite side of the trail. Then he does it again, slightly differently pitched, like there are multiple spotters calling in conflicting positions. The result is immediate chaos. The snipers start whistling frantically, trying to coordinate. One of them moves, confused, and a Marine bar gunner catches him in the open. Then another breaks cover, trying to reposition, and gets cut down. The ambush collapses. The Japanese retreated. Charlie Company doesn't lose a single man. Sergeant Kowalski pulls Jack aside. "You're doing that bird thing again." "Yes, Sergeant." "And it's working?" "I think so, Sergeant." Kowalski stares at him for a long moment. Then, "You just became our most valuable asset, farm boy, and if you get killed, I'm going to be really pissed." Word spreads fast in a rifle company. Within days, other platoons are asking for that weird Kentucky kid who talks to Japs. Battalion intelligence wants to debrief him. Some officers are skeptical. This sounds like superstition, like rubbing a rabbit's foot before a mission. But the body count doesn't lie. Patrols with merit are coming back with fewer casualties and more confirmed kills. But there's a problem. The more Jack uses the technique, the more the Japanese adapt. They start changing their signals. They start using counter whistles, trying to flush out the American who's mimicking them. And some of the veteran snipers stop using audio signals altogether, switching to hand signs and pre-planned timing. Jack is in an evolutionary arms race. Every time he learns a new call, the enemy changes. Every time he disrupts an ambush, they get more cautious, and the pressure is suffocating. His entire company is depending on a skill he learned as a bored kid in the woods. If he gets it wrong, if he misreads a signal, if he whistles the wrong call at the wrong time, men die. His hands start shaking. He stops sleeping. Every bird call in the jungle makes him flinch. And then came October 7th, 1942, the day everything nearly falls apart. Charlie Company is tasked with taking a ridge called Hill 281, a jungle-covered position overlooking a key supply route. Intelligence says it's lightly defended. Intelligence is wrong. The hill is a fortress, honeycombed with spider holes and sniper nests, defended by at least a platoon of Japanese infantry with interlocking fields of fire. The assault begins at dawn, and within minutes, it's a slaughter. Machine gun fire pours down from concealed positions. Snipers pick off squad leaders. Mortars start dropping with terrifying accuracy. Charlie Company is pinned in a kill zone with no cover and nowhere to go. Jack is trapped behind a fallen palm tree with 5 other Marines when he hears it. A complex series of whistles, like a symphony of death, coordinating the Japanese defensive fire. He recognizes some of the calls, but there are new ones, signals he's never heard before. He has 2 choices: stay silent and let his unit get massacred, or start whistling and hope he doesn't make it worse. Jack closes his eyes, thinks of his grandfather's voice. "The woods will talk to you if you listen, boy," and starts to whistle. And the battle for Hill 281 begins. Hazard, Kentucky. Summer 1927. Jack Merritt was 9 years old the first time his grandfather took him into the deep woods and told him to disappear, not hide. Daniel Merritt was specific about the distinction. "Hiding is what rabbits do when the hawk comes," the old man said, his voice rough as tree bark. "Disappearing is what the forest itself does. You don't crouch behind something and hope you ain't seen. You become part of what's already there." They were standing on a ridge above the Cumberland River, surrounded by oak and hickory so thick the morning sun barely touched the ground. Daniel was 73, lean and weathered, with hands that looked like gnarled roots. He'd spent 50 years walking survey lines for timber companies, marking trees in wilderness where most men got lost inside an hour. "How do I do that?" Jack asked. "First, you learn to listen. Really listen. Not for what you expect to hear, for what's actually there." Daniel went quiet. Jack tried to do the same, but all he heard was nothing, just wind and leaves and his own breathing. Then his grandfather made a sound, a soft, warbling whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. 3 seconds later, a wood thrush answered from a dogwood 20 yards away. Then another, farther off. Then a whole conversation of birds, calling and responding across the canopy. "You hear that?" Daniel whispered. "That's the woods talking. Every bird, every critter, they're telling each other stories all day long. Who's where? What's safe? What ain't? You learn that language, you're never lost. Never alone, either." Jack stared at his grandfather. "You can talk to birds?" "Not to 'em. Like 'em. Big difference." Daniel grinned, showing the gaps in his teeth. "Come on, I'll teach you." That summer became Jack's education in a language most people never knew existed. Daniel taught him the 2-note call of the Eastern Towhee, drink your tea, and how to make it sound questionable or certain. He taught him the descending trill of the wood thrush, the sharp birdie, birdie, birdie of the cardinal, the haunting tremolo of the screech owl. But more importantly, he taught Jack why the birds made those sounds. Territorial warnings, mating calls, alarm signals when a fox passed below. Every sound has a purpose, Daniel explained during one of their long walks. Birds don't waste energy making noise for nothing. They're talking because they need to. You learn to speak their language. You learn what they're saying about the world around you. They'd stop on the trail and Daniel would point to a distant ridge. Listen, hear them crows raising hell? Something's bothering them. Probably a hawk. Now listen closer. Hear how the robins went quiet? They're waiting to see which way the hawk goes before they start up again. Jack began to understand. The forest wasn't silent chaos. It was a network of voices, all connected, all sharing information. And if you knew how to listen and how to speak, you could tap into that network. By age 12, Jack could mimic 37 different bird species well enough to fool other birds. He'd whistle like a Carolina wren and watch the real wrens come investigate, furious that an intruder had entered their territory. He'd hoot like a barred owl at dusk and hear the genuine owls respond from their roosts. But Daniel taught him something more valuable than imitation. He taught him how to throw his voice, making sounds seem to originate from places they didn't. It was an old timber cruiser trick, useful for signaling partners across ravines or confusing predators. You pucker your lips like this, Daniel demonstrated, and you aim the sound. Not with your mouth, with your mind. You picture where you want it to land and you put it there. It took Jack months to master. Hours of practice on ridgelines, whistling and listening to how the sound bounced off rock faces and rolled through hollows. Eventually, he could stand in one spot and make a bird call sound like it came from 20 feet to his left, or from the canopy above, or from across a creek bed. His brothers thought it was the dumbest thing they'd ever seen. "What are you going to do with that, Jack?" His older brother Thomas laughed. "Get a job in the circus?" His father was less amused. "Boys wasting time that could be spent working," he told Daniel. "Ain't no money whistling at birds." But Daniel just smiled that gap-toothed smile. "Maybe not, but there's wisdom in it. And wisdom's worth more than money when you're lost in the dark." Jack didn't understand what his grandfather meant. Not then. He just knew that the woods felt like home in a way his family's tobacco farm never did. In the forest, nobody expected him to be stronger or tougher or more useful. He could just walk and listen and speak the language the trees had been speaking for 1,000 years. When Daniel died in the winter of 1934, he left Jack two things: a worn surveyor's compass and a final piece of advice. "The world's bigger than these hills, boy," he whispered from his deathbed. "And it's meaner, too. But don't forget, everything that talks has a pattern. You learn the pattern, you can survive anywhere." Jack kept the compass. He remembered the advice. But when he enlisted in the Marines in February 1941, he left the bird calls behind. They belonged to childhood, to Kentucky ridges, and a grandfather's voice. War was something different, something serious, or so he thought. Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, South Carolina. March 1941. Paris Island was designed to break men down and rebuild them as Marines. For Jack Merritt, it just felt loud. After years of walking silent ridges where a snapping twig meant something, the constant shouting was overwhelming. Drill instructors screamed instructions that could have been spoken. Boots thundered on parade grounds at all hours. Rifles clattered, men cursed, whistles blew for formations that happened 6 times a day. Jack kept his head down and tried to blend in. It didn't work. "Merritt, you fire that rifle like you're asking it politely to shoot," Staff Sergeant Hendricks bellowed during rifle qualification. "This ain't a goddamn square dance. You're killing the enemy, not courting him." The problem was that Jack had never fired a gun before enlisting, while his family couldn't afford one, and his grandfather didn't believe in them. Loud and clumsy, Daniel used to say. You fire a gun in the woods, everything worth seeing runs away. So while farm boys from Texas and Montana posted expert marksman scores, Jack barely qualified. Same story with bayonet drills. Too hesitant. Hand-to-hand combat. Too skinny. Obstacle courses. Too slow. He wasn't the worst recruit in Platoon 231, but he wasn't memorable either. Just another mediocre enlistee who'd probably spend the war loading supplies on a dock somewhere. The incident happened in Week 7 during a night navigation exercise. The platoon was dropped in the South Carolina marsh with compasses and coordinates, expected to find their way back to base before dawn. It was designed to be disorienting. Thick vegetation, standing water, no trails, no moonlight. Jack found it easier than walking to the general store back home. He navigated by sound. The direction of the cricket chirps told him where the dry ground was. The calls of Chuck Will's widows told him where the tree line ran. When he heard the low grunt of an alligator, he knew which way the deep water lay and adjusted his route. He finished 40 minutes ahead of the next recruit. Sergeant Hendricks was waiting at the rally point, checking his watch with suspicion. "Merritt, you get lost and stumble back here by accident?" "No, Sergeant." "Then how'd you navigate that swamp in the dark faster than men with flashlights?" Jack hesitated. "I listened, Sergeant." "Listened to what?" The birds and the frogs, Sergeant. They tell you where things are." The other drill instructors who'd gathered around started laughing. Hendricks didn't. He just stared at Jack like he'd claimed to navigate by fairy dust. "That's some kind of hillbilly superstition, Merritt?" "No, Sergeant. My grandfather taught me. Different animals make different sounds depending on—" "I don't care what your grandfather taught you." Hendricks stepped closer. "I care that you follow Marine Corps navigation procedures. Compass, map, landmarks. Not whatever backwoods voodoo you think you're doing. Understood?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Now drop and give me 50 for wasting my time with nonsense." Jack never mentioned the bird calls again. He finished boot camp in June 1941, scoring average in every category except land navigation, where he mysteriously excelled despite claiming to barely understand compass readings. He was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, 7th Regiment, Charlie Company, a standard rifle platoon with no special distinctions. The other Marines in Charlie Company were exactly what you'd expect: farm boys and factory workers, high school dropouts and college washouts, men running towards something or away from something else. Jack became friends with a few: Jimmy Costas from Philadelphia, Ray Burton from Oklahoma, Eddie Yates from Georgia. They'd sit in the barracks at Camp Lejeune, smoking cigarettes they'd pooled their money to buy, talking about girls and baseball, and whether Roosevelt was going to drag them into the war in Europe. "You ever kill anything, Merritt?" Eddie asked one night. "No. Not even hunting?" "Never been." Eddie shook his head. "Man, what kind of Kentucky boy doesn't hunt?" "The kind that's bad at it, I guess." They all laughed, and Jack laughed with them. It was easier than explaining that his grandfather taught him to move through the woods without disturbing anything, to observe without interfering, to speak the language of things that fled from gunshots. December 7th, 1941, changed everything. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and suddenly, the war nobody wanted became the war everyone was fighting. The 1st Marine Division received deployment orders for the Pacific Theater. Training intensified. New equipment arrived. Chaplains held services every evening for men who hadn't prayed since childhood. Jack wrote home twice, short letters that said he was fine and not to worry. His father didn't write back. His brothers sent a single postcard. "Don't embarrass the family by getting killed, stupid." On June 1, 1942, Charlie Company boarded a transport ship in San Diego. Destination: Wellington, New Zealand, then north to somewhere called Guadalcanal. Jack stood on deck as the California coast disappeared, watching seabirds follow the ship. Gulls and pelicans and terns, calling and diving, speaking a language he understood better than military commands. A corporal named Davies stood next to him, looking green from seasickness. "Hell you smiling about, Merritt?" Jack hadn't realized he was smiling. "Nothing, just watching the birds." "Yeah, well, watch 'em good. Where we're going, everything that flies is trying to kill you." Davies had no idea how right he was, but he also had no idea that the quiet Kentucky private standing beside him possessed a skill that would soon become the difference between living and dying in a jungle where the enemy spoke in whistles. And the only way to fight back was to learn their language. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, August 7, 1942. The first thing Jack noticed about Guadalcanal wasn't the heat or the humidity, or even the sound of naval guns pounding the beach ahead of them. It was the birds. Even over the roar of the Higgins boat engine and the shouting Marines and the distant explosions, he could hear them. Strange calls he'd never heard before, high-pitched and alien, coming from the dense jungle that rose up beyond the sand like a green wall. The second thing he noticed, as his boots hit the black volcanic sand, was that none of the other Marines heard them at all. "Move! Move! Get off the beach!" Sergeant Kowalski screamed, and Charlie Company ran toward the tree line with their rifles ready, expecting enemy fire that never came. The Japanese had withdrawn from the coast during the night. The landing was unopposed, almost anticlimactic. By noon, the Marines had secured Henderson Field, the half-finished airstrip that was the whole reason for the invasion, and dug defensive positions in the kunai grass. "Hell, this ain't so bad," Eddie Yates said, grinning as he filled sandbags. "Maybe the Japs heard we were coming and ran all the way back to Tokyo." He was wrong. The Japanese hadn't run. They'd retreated into the jungle to wait, to watch, to pick their moment. And over the next 72 hours, Charlie Company learned the difference between fighting an enemy and fighting ghosts. August 10th, a patrol from the 2nd Platoon went into the jungle to scout Japanese positions. 6 men went in. 4 came back. Nobody heard shots. Nobody saw the enemy. The 2 missing Marines were found the next day with single bullet wounds to the head, their weapons still holstered. August 12th, a machine gun crew setting up a position near the Lunga River took fire from the tree line. They returned fire, shredding the jungle with .30 caliber rounds. When they went to check for bodies, they found nothing. No blood, no brass, no sign anyone had been there. August 14th, a sniper killed a lieutenant while he was shaving. One shot from somewhere in the jungle canopy, 200 yards away. Marines fired blindly into the trees for 10 minutes. The sniper never fired again, just melted back into the green. The jungle wasn't like anything Jack had experienced in Kentucky. The trees were wrong. Massive, twisted things with roots that rose out of the ground like walls. The undergrowth was so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in any direction. Vines hung from the canopy like ropes, and the air was so humid that breathing felt like drowning. But worse than the terrain was the sound. Back home, the forest had rhythm and pattern. Here, everything was chaotic. Strange birds screamed. Insects buzzed in clouds. Rain hammered the leaves like gunfire. And underneath it all, a constant rustling that could be wind or enemy movement, or just the jungle shifting. Most Marines learned to tune it out, to treat the noise as static. Jack couldn't. His grandfather's training wouldn't let him. He kept listening, kept trying to find the pattern beneath the chaos, and slowly he began to hear it. August 18th, Jack was on perimeter guard when he noticed something odd. There was a bird call, 2 short chirps, repeated 3 times, that he'd been hearing all day. It came from different locations, always near where patrols were moving. At first, he assumed it was just a territorial bird, common in the area. But then he heard the same call at night. And birds don't sing in the dark unless something's wrong. He mentioned it to Ray Burton during a guard shift change. "You hear that bird? The one that goes chirp, 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 chirp?" Ray looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Merritt, there's 1,000 birds out there. How am I supposed to—" A rifle shot cracked from the jungle. A Marine 50 yards down the line screamed and went down, hit in the leg. Everyone opened fire at nothing, bullets tearing through vegetation while the enemy remained invisible. When the shooting stopped and the medics were hauling the wounded Marine away, Jack heard it again. That same two-chirp call, moving away through the jungle. Not a bird, a signal. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole, listening to the jungle with new understanding. The Japanese weren't just hiding in the trees, they were using the jungle's own language against the Marines, communicating with calls that sounded natural, coordinating movements with whistles that blended into the background noise. It was brilliant, it was invisible, and it was killing his friends. Jack thought about his grandfather's words. Everything that talks has a pattern. You learn the pattern, you can survive anywhere. Maybe Daniel Merritt had been preparing him for this war all along. Maybe those childhood hours on Kentucky ridges weren't wasted time. Maybe they were exactly the training he needed. He just had to figure out how to use it before the invisible enemy killed them all. And he had to do it without sounding insane to men who thought bird-watching was a waste of time. Guadalcanal, August 21st to September 12th, 1942. Jack started with the obvious signals, the ones repeated frequently enough to be functional communication rather than actual wildlife. He'd sit in his foxhole during guard duty, notebook balanced on his knee, pencil stub ready. 2 short chirps equals heard before patrols get hit. 3 rising notes equals heard after successful ambush long whistle. Descending equals movement stopping. The other Marines thought he'd lost his mind. "The hell are you writing, Merritt?" Jimmy Costas asked one morning, peering over his shoulder. "Love letters to birds?" "Just keeping notes." "On what?" "Sounds, patterns, I don't know yet." Jimmy shook his head. "You're going to the jungle, happy Kentucky. Happens to guys. They start seeing things that ain't there. Hearing things that don't mean nothing. You need to sleep more." But Jack couldn't sleep. Every night the jungle spoke in whispers and calls, and every night men died because they couldn't understand what was being said. 3 more Marines were killed in the last week, 2 wounded, all from snipers who fired once and vanished. The breakthrough came on August 27th. Charlie Company was running a patrol along the Tanaru River when Jack heard a sequence he'd noted before. 3 short whistles followed by a pause, then 2 long ones. He'd logged that exact pattern 4 times over the past week, always within 10 minutes of contact with the enemy. "Sergeant," Jack whispered to Kowalski, "we're about to get hit." Kowalski turned. "What?" "That whistle. I've heard it before. Right before." Gunfire erupted from the tree line. A Japanese machine gun opened up, stitching rounds across the trail. Charlie Company hit the dirt, returning fire blindly, while bullets snapped overhead. But because Jack had given them 10 seconds warning, everyone was already moving toward cover when the shooting started. No casualties. No one even hit. When they made it back to the perimeter, Kowalski pulled Jack aside. "How'd you know?" "The whistle, Sarge. It's a signal. They use them to coordinate." "You sure about that?" "Pretty sure." Kowalski studied him for a long moment. "Keep listening, Merritt, and keep telling me what you hear." That conversation changed everything. Suddenly, Jack wasn't crazy. He was useful. Kowalski started positioning him near the front of patrols, close enough to hear signals before they became ambushes. Other squad leaders heard about it and requested him for their operations. Jack's notebook filled with entries. Sharp descending call equals retreat, disengage. Rapid clicking sound equals target marked. Soft coo, like dove. So sentry all clear, high, low, high pattern equal officer signal? He began to understand that the Japanese system wasn't random. It was structured, almost musical. Different calls for different meanings, variations for urgency or distance. It was exactly what his grandfather had taught him about bird communication. Functional language disguised as natural sound. And if it was a language, it could be learned. More importantly, it could be spoken. September 5th, Jack worked up the courage to test his theory. Charlie Company was pinned down by a sniper team near Hill 123. They'd been stuck behind a coral ridge for 20 minutes, unable to move forward or back. Every time someone shifted position, a bullet cracked past. Jack heard the familiar two-chirp signal from the trees ahead, then an answering call from the left flank. The snipers were coordinating, keeping the Marines boxed in, while a machine gun team moved into position. Without thinking it through, without asking permission, Jack pursed his lips and whistled. Two chirps, exactly matching the pitch and rhythm he'd heard. Silence from the jungle. Then, confused, a return whistle. 3 rising notes instead of the expected response. Jack whistled again, this time throwing his voice the way his grandfather taught him, making it sound like it came from 20 feet to his right. The enemy signal came again, more urgent, questioning. "What the hell are you doing?" Ray Burton hissed. "Confusing them." And it was working. The sniper fire had stopped. Jack could hear movement in the trees, not toward the Marines, but lateral, repositioning. The snipers thought their spotter had moved and were trying to re-establish visual contact. Sergeant Kowalski understood immediately. "Second squad, move left, now!" While the snipers were distracted, hunting for a spotter who didn't exist, half of Charlie Company flanked their position. By the time the Japanese realized what happened, Marines were on top of them. 2 enemy soldiers killed, 1 captured, 0 American casualties. That evening, Kowalski brought Jack to meet Lieutenant Morrison, the company commander. Morrison was a Boston College graduate, 24 years old, already losing hair from stress. He listened to Jack's explanation with the skeptical expression of a man who'd heard too many insane theories from sleep-deprived privates. "So you're telling me," Morrison said slowly, "that you learned to confuse Japanese snipers by imitating bird calls you learned from your grandfather in Kentucky?" "Yes, sir." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Morrison paused. "It's also the only thing that's worked. You just saved 8 men, Merritt, maybe more." He looked at Kowalski. "Keep him alive, Sergeant. Whatever it takes. And if he wants to whistle at the enemy, let him." Jack Merritt had just become Charlie Company's secret weapon. But the real test was still coming. Because word was spreading through the Japanese forces, too. There was an American who spoke their signal language. And if they couldn't figure out how to stop him, they were going to try something more direct. They were going to hunt him. Guadalcanal, September 14th. October 6, 1942, the Japanese sniper who'd been tracking Jack Merritt for 3 days had a name. Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto, Imperial Japanese Army, trained at the Nakano School for Guerrilla Warfare. He'd killed 17 Americans since landing on Guadalcanal. He planned to make the Whistling Marine number 18. Yamamoto had first heard about the American during a briefing from his company commander. "There's a soldier disrupting our communication signals. He imitates our calls, creating confusion. Several operations have failed because of him. Find him. Kill him." It should have been simple, but this American was different. He didn't just make noise, he understood the language. He knew when to respond and when to stay silent. He could throw his voice, making it impossible to locate. Worst of all, he was learning faster than Yamamoto's unit could adapt their signals. Jack didn't know he was being hunted. Not at first, but he noticed the change in enemy tactics around September 16th. The Japanese stopped using certain signals when Charlie Company was in the area. They switched patterns more frequently, and twice Jack heard whistles that seemed designed specifically to draw him out, calls that made no tactical sense, positioned like bait. "They know about you," Sergeant Kowalski said during a briefing. "Intelligence says the Japs are talking about an American who speaks their language. You need to be more careful." "How much more careful can I be, Sarge? I'm already at war." "I mean, watch your back. They're not just trying to kill random Marines anymore. They're trying to kill you specifically." The thought should have terrified Jack. Instead, it felt oddly familiar. His grandfather used to tell stories about timber cruisers who got targeted by mountain lions after disrupting their territory. "Once a predator knows you're a threat," Daniel had said, "it stops avoiding you and starts hunting you." September 21st, Jack got his first confirmation that he was prey. Charlie Company was setting up a defensive position when Jack heard a new signal, a four-note descending whistle he'd never logged before. It came from deep in the jungle, repeated 3 times. Then silence. Something felt wrong. The call was too isolated, too deliberate. No follow-up signals, no coordination pattern. Just that one call, waiting for a response. Ray Burton noticed Jack's expression. "What?" "That whistle." "It's bait." "How do you know?" "Because it doesn't mean anything. It's not part of their system." Jack scanned the jungle canopy. "They're trying to make me respond so they can locate me." He stayed silent. The whistle came again. Closer this time, more insistent. Still Jack didn't respond. After 10 minutes, he heard frustrated movement in the undergrowth. Someone repositioning, hunting for a target that wouldn't reveal itself. "They're learning," Jack told Kowalski that night. "Adapting. Using the same tricks I'm using against them. Can you still do your thing?" "For now, but it's getting harder." October 2nd, they almost got him. Jack was with a patrol near the Matanikau River when he heard the signal he'd been dreading, a perfect imitation of his own whistle technique, thrown to sound like it came from multiple directions. Whoever was out there had been studying him, learning his patterns the same way he'd learned theirs. He froze. The rest of the patrol kept moving, oblivious. Then Jack heard it, the tiniest sound, barely audible over the jungle noise, the scrape of metal on wood, a rifle being positioned in a tree, 40 yards ahead and to the right. "Down!" Jack screamed, hitting the dirt. A bullet cracked through the space where his head had been 1 second earlier. The patrol scattered, returning fire, and Jack scrambled behind a fallen log while rounds snapped overhead. The sniper fired twice more, both shots missing by inches, before vanishing into the jungle. When Charlie Company swept the area, they found the position. A platform built into a banyan tree, camouflaged so perfectly it was invisible until you were directly underneath. They also found something else, scratched into the bark in English. "The Birdman dies soon." Jimmy Costas stared at the message. "They know it's you. They know your name. Well, not your name, but—" "I get it, Jimmy." Lieutenant Morrison ordered Jack pulled from patrol duty for 72 hours. "You're too valuable to lose to some vendetta. Stay in the perimeter until this cools down." But Jack knew it wouldn't cool down. The Japanese sniper, whoever he was, had made this personal. And the only way it would end was if one of them stopped whistling permanently. He just had to make sure it wasn't him. Guadalcanal, October 7, 1942, 05:45 hours. Charlie Company formed up in the pre-dawn darkness, 73 Marines checking weapons and tightening straps with the quiet efficiency of men who knew what was coming. Hill 281 rose before them, a jungle-covered ridge barely 200 feet high, but steep enough to matter, dense enough to hide an army. Lieutenant Morrison gathered the squad leaders. "Intelligence says 1 platoon, maybe 30 Japs, dug in but not fortified. We go straight up the middle, fast and loud. Overwhelm them before they can organize." Jack stood with his fire team, listening to the briefing and feeling the wrongness of it settle in his gut. The jungle on that ridge was too quiet. No bird calls, no insect noise. Just silence, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Sarge," Jack whispered to Kowalski. "Something's off." "Everything's off, Merritt. It's war." "No, I mean the hill. It's too quiet. There should be—" "We move in 5 minutes. Get your head straight." At 0600 hours, Charlie Company began the assault. They made it exactly 40 yards up the slope, before the world exploded. Machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions. Not one gun but 4. Interlocking fields of fire that turned the jungle into a kill zone. Rifle fire cracked from spider holes invisible under the undergrowth. Mortars started dropping with terrifying accuracy, geysers of dirt and shrapnel erupting among the advancing Marines. "Contact front! Contact left!" someone screamed, but the words were drowned out by gunfire. Men dropped. Lieutenant Morrison took shrapnel to the chest and went down hard. Corporal Davies caught a rifle round through the shoulder and fell screaming. The assault broke into chaos, some Marines diving for cover, others trying to push forward, everyone shouting contradictory orders. Jack hit the dirt behind a fallen palm tree, bullets chewing the trunk above his head. Ray Burton crashed down beside him, blood running from a gash on his forehead. Jimmy Costas and Eddie Yates were there too, along with a private named Miller, who was crying and praying simultaneously. "This ain't one platoon!" Eddie yelled over the gunfire. "This is a goddamn fortress!" He was right. Intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. Hill 281 wasn't lightly defended. It was a prepared defensive position with at least a company of Japanese infantry, dug in and waiting. Sergeant Kowalski crawled over, his face grim. "We're pinned. Can't go forward, can't retreat without getting cut to pieces. Morrison's down. Lieutenant Chen's trying to call for artillery support, but the radio's not getting through the canopy." The firing continued in waves, disciplined, controlled, devastating. Charlie Company was being systematically destroyed. And then Jack heard it. Whistles. Complex patterns, multiple signals overlapping. The Japanese were coordinating their fire, shifting machine gun positions, directing mortar teams, communicating across the entire hillside in a language of calls and responses. He recognized some of the signals from his notebook. 2 short chirps. Enemy position confirmed. The long descending whistle, hold fire. But there were new ones too. Patterns he'd never heard, signals he'd never cataloged. The enemy was conducting a symphony of death, and Charlie Company couldn't even hear the music. "Merritt." Kowalski was staring at him. "You hear what I'm hearing?" "Yeah." "Can you do something about it?" Jack looked at the 5 Marines crammed behind the log with him, then at the rest of Charlie Company, scattered and bleeding across the hillside, then at the jungle canopy, where invisible enemies were speaking a language designed to kill them all. He had 2 choices: stay silent and watch his entire company die, or start whistling and become the primary target of every Japanese soldier on that hill, including the sniper who'd already promised to kill him. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "The woods will talk to you if you listen, boy." Jack closed his eyes, took a breath, and pursed his lips. The battle for Hill 281 was about to become a conversation. And only one side knew they were talking. Hill 281, 0647 hours. Jack started with the simplest signal, the 2-chirp pattern he'd heard 100 times. Enemy position confirmed. But he threw his voice hard to the left, making it sound like it came from the Japanese machine gun nest on the western flank. The effect was immediate. Confused whistles erupted from multiple positions. The eastern machine gun stopped firing, waiting for clarification. A mortar team held their next round. "Keep going," Kowalski whispered. "Whatever you're doing, keep going." Jack whistled again, 3 rising notes, the signal he'd logged as position confirmed or ready to fire. But this time, he made it sound like it came from behind the Japanese lines, deeper in the jungle, where no American should be. Panic rippled through the enemy communications. Rapid whistles, questioning, urgent. Were they surrounded? Had Americans flanked them? The disciplined fire patterns began to fragment. "Second squad!" Kowalski shouted. "Move left while they're confused! Go, go, go!" A fire team broke from cover and sprinted 20 yards to better positions. The Japanese spotted the movement but hesitated, unsure if it was a feint or a flanking attack, their coordination shattered by conflicting signals. Jack kept whistling. He cycled through every pattern in his notebook, throwing each call from different directions, creating phantom spotters and imaginary units. The long descending whistle, "Cease fire," from the north. The sharp ascending call, "Enemy approaching," from the south. The clicking pattern, "Target marked," coming from directly above, as if American snipers had infiltrated the canopy. The Japanese defensive symphony collapsed into cacophony. Machine guns fired at shadows. Mortars fell on an empty jungle. Rifle fire cracked in every direction as nervous soldiers shot at sounds they couldn't identify. And through it all, Jack listened, not just making noise, but conducting a conversation, responding to their signals with false confirmations that drove them deeper into confusion. A Japanese whistle screamed from the ridgetop. 4 sharp notes, desperate, authoritative. An officer trying to restore order, demanding confirmation of American positions. Jack responded with the exact same call, but thrown from 3 different directions in rapid succession, making it sound like multiple officers giving contradictory commands. "They're breaking!" Eddie Yates shouted. "Look, they're pulling back!" He was right. The eastern machine gun abandoned its position. Rifle fire slackened on the northern approach. The mortars went silent. The Japanese were retreating, not from American firepower, but from phantom signals that made them think they were encircled, outmaneuvered, surrounded by an enemy that didn't exist. Charlie Company seized the moment. Marines advanced up the slope, taking abandoned positions, pushing toward the summit. The impossible assault succeeded because the enemy was fighting ghosts. But Jack heard something else beneath the chaos. A single whistle. Clean, precise, cutting through the confusion like a blade. It came from high in the canopy, 50 yards upslope. And it wasn't a tactical signal. It was a challenge. Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto had finally found the Birdman. The sniper who'd been hunting Jack for 3 weeks had been on Hill 281 the entire time, waiting for exactly this moment. He'd listened to Jack's whistles, tracked the sound, and now he knew exactly where the American was hiding. The challenge whistle came again, a deliberate imitation of Jack's throne voice technique, mocking him, daring him to respond. Ray Burton grabbed Jack's shoulder. Don't answer that. He's trying to locate you." Jack knew. He also knew that Yamamoto wouldn't stop. Not now, not ever. As long as the Japanese sniper lived, he'd hunt Jack through every jungle on every island until one of them was dead. The rest of Charlie Company was advancing. The battle was being won. Jack could stay silent, stay safe, let the moment pass. But his grandfather's voice wouldn't let him. "Everything that talks has a pattern. You learn the pattern, you can survive anywhere." Jack Merritt stood up, stepped from behind the log, and whistled back. Not a throne call, not a disguised signal, a clear, direct response that said exactly where he was, an acceptance of the challenge. "Merritt, no!" Kowalski screamed. But it was too late. Somewhere in the canopy above, Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto was already taking aim. Hill 281, or 651 hours. Jack stood motionless, every nerve screaming at him to move, to dive for cover, to run. But movement meant death. The sniper was already sighted in, waiting for him to flinch. Instead, Jack listened. The jungle had gone quiet around them. Even the gunfire from the rest of the battle seemed distant, muffled. It was just Jack and the invisible enemy having a conversation measured in heartbeats. Then he heard it. Not a gunshot, not movement, a breath. 50 yards upslope, 20 feet high, in a massive banyan tree with aerial roots that created natural shooting platforms. The sniper had exhaled, just a whisper of sound, but enough. Jack didn't turn his head, didn't shift his eyes. He pursed his lips and made a sound he'd never used in combat before. The territorial call of a barred owl. The warning cry his grandfather taught him meant, "I see you, and I'm not backing down." From the tree came a soft, surprised exhale. Yamamoto understood. The birdman had located him. The sniper made his choice. He rose from his position, rifle shouldered, and found Jack Merritt in his sights. But Jack had been waiting for exactly that moment. The instant he heard fabric rustle against bark, he whistled, sharp and piercing, turning every Marine head toward the sound. Including Eddie Yates, 20 feet from the sniper's position with a BR. Eddie fired first, 6 rounds in 2 seconds. Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto dropped without ever pulling his trigger, killed by a farm boy from Georgia who wouldn't have seen him if a farm boy from Kentucky hadn't told him exactly where to look. By 800 hours, Hill 281 belonged to Charlie Company. The Japanese abandoned their fortress, scattered by phantom signals and real bullets, their defensive symphony silenced by one Marine who'd learned to speak their language better than they spoke it themselves. Casualties: 12 Americans killed, 21 wounded. It should have been triple that. Everyone knew it. In his after-action report, Lieutenant Chen wrote, "Victory achieved through unconventional communication disruption employed by PFC Merritt, J." The Marines called it a miracle. Jack called it listening. Guadalcanal, November 1942. Word spread fast. Intelligence officers interviewed Jack for 3 hours, trying to document his technique. Other units requested him for operations. A Marine Corps captain from Signals Intelligence wanted to create a training program based on his methods. "Can you teach this to other men?" the captain asked. Jack thought about his grandfather's patient hands, the decades of wilderness knowledge, the childhood hours spent learning to hear what the forest was saying. Maybe, he said, but it'd take more than a few weeks. The program never materialized. The Japanese adapted, shifted to different communication methods, and by December, the whistle signals had largely disappeared from Guadalcanal's jungles. But Jack Merritt's war wasn't over. He fought through Tarawa, Saipan, and Okinawa, surviving battles that killed half his original company. He never used the whistles quite the same way again. The enemy had learned, but he still heard things other Marines didn't. Still moved through jungles like he was part of them. He came home in October 1945 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and memories that made sleep impossible. Hazard, Kentucky, 1946. Jack returned to the ridge above the Cumberland River on a cold November morning, carrying his grandfather's compass and wearing his dress uniform. Daniel Merritt's grave was simple, just a stone marker and a patch of mountain laurel. "You were right," Jack said quietly to the weathered headstone. "About everything. The woods, the listening, all of it. You taught me a language, and it saved my life. Saved a lot of lives." A wood thrush called from the oak canopy, that descending flute-like song he'd heard 1,000 times as a child. Jack whistled back, and the bird answered, curious, territorial, alive. His hands didn't shake when he whistled anymore. Epilogue. The official Marine Corps history of Guadalcanal mentions PFC Jack Merritt in a single footnote. Unconventional acoustic disruption tactics employed during the battle for Hill 281. No details, no explanation, just a reference that means nothing to anyone who wasn't there. The men of Charlie Company told a different story. In bars and VFW halls, they'd talk about the Kentucky private who won a battle by confusing the enemy with bird calls, who survived a sniper duel by listening harder than his opponent. Some versions got embellished, some got the details wrong. But they all agreed on one thing. Jack Merritt heard what other men couldn't, and it made all the difference. Modern military doctrine doesn't include sections on bird call mimicry. There are no training programs teaching soldiers to communicate through wildlife sounds. Jack's technique died with the specific conditions that created it: dense jungle, enemy whistle signals, and one farm boy who'd spent his childhood learning to speak the language of the wilderness. But the principle survives in every field manual about listening, observing, understanding the environment you're fighting in. And sometimes, late at night in officer training courses, an instructor will tell the story of Guadalcanal and a Marine who saved his company with a skill nobody thought mattered. Because war doesn't care what training you think you need. Sometimes it cares about what your grandfather taught you on a Kentucky ridge when you were 9 years old, learning to disappear into the forest by becoming part of its conversation. Sometimes the most valuable weapon isn't the one you were issued. Sometimes it's the one you brought from home.